On October 3rd, 2014, an argument ensued on an episode of Real Time with Bill Maher. The two people involved in the argument were neuroscientist and best-selling author Sam Harris, the other, Academy Award-winning filmmaker and latest choice to play Batman, Ben Affleck.
When you want to talk about the treatment of women and homosexuals and free thinkers and public intellectuals in the Muslim world, I would argue that liberals have failed us.
It was shortly after Sam Harris made this argument that Ben Affleck decided to butt in.
Why are you so hostile about this?
It's gross. It's racist.
It's not. But it's so not.
It's like saying those stateless, shifty Jew.
You're not listening
Absolutely
to
not.
what we are saying.
The panel was never able to recover after that.
You don't understand my argument.
Your argument is like, black people, they show each other.
That is not my argument.
I wouldn't say, well, Ted Bundy did this. Goddamn, these gays, they're all trying to eat each other.
Ben, we have to be able to criticize bad ideas. And
of course we do. No liberal doesn't want to criticize bad
but
ideas.
Islam is the motherlode of bad ideas.
Jesus.
So
It is
basic liberal
well, let me unpack it.
tolerance.
Let me unpack it.
But not for intolerance.
Or how about the more than a billion people who aren't fanatical, who don't punch women, who just want to go to school,
Wait a second.
sandwiches,
Wait a
25
second.
times a day,
Right.
and
Wait a
don't do
second.
any of the things that you're saying all Muslims
Wait a second.
wait.
stereotyping.
What the hell happened on this panel, and who's to blame for the conversation going off the rails? Well, ultimately, the misunderstanding was on the part of Ben Affleck. Sam Harris's argument has always been to have honest dialogue about and constructive criticism against the doctrine of Islam, as well as the doctrine of all religions, and any way in which the doctrine of certain religions causes people to be mistreated. He backs his claims up with research, data, and statistics, and he has said repeatedly throughout the interview that he was not condemning all Muslims. But nonetheless, Ben Affleck, by virtue of just not paying attention, decided that Sam Harris was being intolerant.
The question is the degree to which you're willing to say, because I've witnessed this behavior, which we all object to on the part of these people, I'm willing to flatly condemn those of you I don't know and have never met.
No,
This is
it's not
based
condemning
on
people. It's
yeah,
ideas.
This is
It's not
based
condemning
on
people. It's
yeah,
ideas. It's
yeah,
ideas. It's
yeah,
ideas.
So since Affleck called Harris's argument racist, and since Harris's argument is to constructively criticize the doctrine of Islam, by default, Ben Affleck's argument is criticizing Islam is racist. By now you're probably wondering why the word racist got mixed up in all this. After all, Islam is not an ethnicity. Okay, so Mr. Affleck misspoke. That's no big deal. It's very likely that the word racist could be replaced with bigoted, and the meaning of what he was trying to say would not be lost. But as luck would have it, there's actually a single word that embodies this very argument, and that word is Islamophobia. This is the source of all of our troubles. So, what exactly is Islamophobia? Well, the definition goes as follows: prejudice against, hatred towards, or fear of Islam or Muslims. Now, what's wrong with this definition? You might have spotted it already. Represented by this one word are two different tasks: disliking Islam, a religion, and disliking Muslims, the people who follow it. Condemning Islam and condemning Muslims are two very different things. One is holy text, a collection of ideas. The other are human beings who subscribe to it, maybe, maybe not. And just to make things even worse, the definition also draws no distinction between hatred and fear, which, again, are not the same thing and should not be incorporated under a single word. This might just explain why Ben Affleck got Sam Harris's criticism of the religion mixed up with prejudice towards Muslims. After all, this clumsy definition opens the door for such confusion. And yet, the definition is not the worst part. The word itself has been constructed very thoughtlessly as well. The first half of the word is a clear swing and a miss. Once again, Islam is not a person, it's a religion. The actual believer is a Muslim. The second half of the word is its own problem entirely. If the definition entails prejudice, phobia doesn't fit the role. A phobia is an extreme or irrational fear of something. They're not the product of ignorance, intolerance, or piss-poor education. They're simply a vulnerability of the human psyche, and anyone who suffers from them cannot be talked out of it. So if someone really did have a phobia of Islam, number one, it wouldn't be their fault, and number two, shouting at them probably wouldn't help. But who says a fear of Islam needs to be irrational? Suffice to say, there is text within the Holy Quran, as well as many other holy books, that any rational person could conceive as being scary. The point is, you don't need to be afraid of Sharia law the same way you're afraid of heights. There are actual reasons for being afraid of this. All things considered, Islamophobia is a gawky, ill-conceived word constructed with little to no sense of the English language. It has no respectable or useful working definition, and it's pointless. There's no need for a word that identifies a specific brand of bigotry. There's already a universal word for that: bigotry. So why the need for this exclusive and incompetent Frankenstein of a word? Well, there's something worth mentioning about liberals that ties into all of this. A quick history lesson, if you will. Over the last 100 years, for example, liberals have usually been on the right side of history. When women were fighting for the vote in the 19-teens, conservatives were opposed, but liberals were supportive. When black communities were fighting for their civil rights in the 50s and 60s, conservatives resisted, but liberals, again, stood for equality. In the late 20th century and into the early 21st century, as homosexuals moved towards legal marriage, conservatives stood in their way, while liberals champion marriage equality. Liberals tend to fight for equal rights, and this is one of their best qualities. Unfortunately, liberals are also the engineers behind political correctness, and here's where things get really interesting. If there's one thing your average liberal is afraid of, it's being called a bigot. That is the last thing they ever want to be called. Remember, they look at history and are determined to stay on the right side of it. It's hard to think that this urge could ever be a weakness, a kryptonite, if you will, but sadly, there are religious apologists out there who exploit this fear by conducting smear campaigns that make critics of Islam come off as bigots. Since they know liberals will impulsively go after anyone they think is a bigot, this works. It's actually quite easier than you might think. Ever since the attacks of September the 11th, Muslims in the Western world have faced a great deal of hatred and hostility. By actual bigots, people who are not interested in having debates, people who are not interested in learning anything, people who are not interested in reforming the religion. They just hate Muslims.
I stand against Islam and the false prophet Muhammad.
Well, you could guess what happens next. Liberals swooped in, and rightfully so, to stand up for Muslims who are the victims of hate crimes. But keep in mind, at the same time this was happening, religious apologists took advantage of this climate to make criticizing Islam non-PC and come off as intolerant. And because a lot of liberals will do anything to avoid being called intolerant, they began to also go after people who were not bigots, people who were interested in having debates, people who were interested in learning, and people who were interested in reforming the religion. Liberals attacked them too, and all they needed was the word Islamophobia, with its sloppy, irresponsible definition to encompass those who hate Muslims, hate Islam, fear Islam, constructively criticize Islam, condemn certain actions by certain Muslims, and those who try to encourage a renaissance within the Muslim world. This term takes all of these very different types of people and plops them into the same camp. Islamophobia is a meme, a tool for conflating criticism of the doctrine of Islam with bigotry towards Muslims as people, which quite frankly is intellectually ridiculous. It's gotten so bad it even exploits white guilt, causing it to slip Freudianly when people claim that it's racist. This is the problem with Islamophobia, and if someone had just taken the time to explain this to Ben Affleck beforehand, he would have never acted the way he did. Right?
We have been sold this meme of Islamophobia, where every criticism of the doctrine of Islam gets conflated with bigotry toward Muslims as people.
Right.
And that is it's intellectually ridiculous. Even it gets
So hold on, are
conflated with
you
racism.
the person who understands the officially codified doctrine of Islam? You're the interpreter of that, so you can say, well, this is...
I'm actually well educated on this topic.
I'm asking you. So you're saying if I criticize you're saying that Islamophobia is not a real thing. That if you're critical of something...
Well, it's not a real thing when we do it.
Right.
No,
It really isn't.
I'm not denying that certain people are bigoted against Muslims as people.
Right.
And that's a
That's
problem.
big of you.
But
why are you so hostile about this?
It's gross. It's racist.
It's not. But it's so not.
It's like saying
It's so not.
you're a shifty Jew.
You're not listening
Absolutely
to
not.
what we are saying.
Oh, right. Ben Affleck wasn't paying attention whatsoever to what Sam Harris had to say. As a matter of fact, not only was he not listening to Sam Harris, apparently he wasn't even willing to be respectful either.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank God you're here.
Yeah, certain people are bigoted against Muslims as people.
Right.
And that's a problem.
Big of you.
Ben, let me unpack this. Let me unpack this for you.
Please do.
We have just imagine the link between doctrine and behavior is not going to do that.
A lot of talk.
Mr. Affleck's childish behavior and hostility towards Mr. Harris is a good example of what the concept of Islamophobia can do to an otherwise well-intentioned liberal brain. All he needed was a little suspicion that Harris was a bigot, and that was it. He didn't listen to any of his points. He repeatedly strawmanned his arguments and got them wrong again and again and again and again. He interrupted everyone on the panel multiple times. He was disrespectful, at times incoherent, and come to find out after the show, he hadn't read any of Sam Harris's books and was completely unfamiliar with his work. Now for the irony. What kind of person slanders other people, disrespects them openly, misrepresents what they stand for, and all the while without doing the slightest bit of research? Here's a clue. It's the same kind of people who are not interested in having discussions, not interested in learning anything, and not interested in changing anything either. You guessed it. When it comes to thinking critically about Islam, there are unfortunately a lot of liberals who think and act in the same knee-jerk fashion that Ben Affleck did on this episode of Real Time. And just like Ben Affleck, those people are not being intellectually honest, and they're not being very liberal either. Even though they think they are the entire time, they're really just being narrow-minded and orthodox. This is the kind of stupidity that you can expect thanks to kabuki terms like Islamophobia. In their effort to confront prejudice and conformity, liberals have accidentally employed those very traits themselves. There are two things to learn from this. One, it's not enough to want to be on the right side of history, okay? Good intentions alone are not enough. You have to be an intelligent and curious human being as well, otherwise you run the risk of smearing someone while making an ass of yourself. And two, and this is the most important one, context matters. Just because something sounds unfavorable or inconvenient doesn't mean it's wrong, and it doesn't mean that the person who said it is full of hate. This is why it's so important to listen to people's arguments without being biased. Some people wrestle with hard truths that are difficult to properly understand. If you strike these people down, label them, and misrepresent them so that others will inevitably treat them with contempt and hostility, you yourself are the bigot, and you're not helping this world become a better place. In all seriousness, how hard can it be to tell the difference between people like this?
We have to empower the true reformers in the Muslim world to change it.
And people like this.
Islam will never dominate the United States, and by the grace of God, it will not dominate Texas!
Keep us from saying anything. Can't separate from everything. Can't all this really means that you want in a crowd and you're paranoid of every sound. Paranoid of every sound.
Some people are really fucking stupid. Did you ever notice that? How many really stupid people you run into during the day? God damn, there's a lot of stupid bastards walking around. And it doesn't take you very long to spot one of them, does it? Take you about 8 seconds. You'll be listening to some guy.
You guys are saying if you want to be liberals, believe in liberal principles like freedom of speech, like we are endowed by our forefathers with an inalienable rights, like all men are created equal.
This guy is fucking stupid. Then there are some people, they're not stupid, they're full of shit. That doesn't take very long to spot either, does it? Take you about the same amount of time. You'll be listening to some guy and say, well, he's fairly intelligent.
And this does have the tinge a little bit of the way white racists talk about African Americans.
He's full of shit.